Hey everyone, today I'm going to be talking about Becoming God's Family by Carmen Imes. This is a brand new release. I believe that today is actually the official release day as I put this video out. So I want to say thank you to IVP for sending me a review copy. This is my honest take on the book. I'll take you through my typical format of commenting on the main idea, kind of summarizing what this book is about. I'll comment a little bit on the research, the readability of the style, and then my general reactions at the end. Before I dive into that, though, I just want to note that if you are interested in getting more connected with me, the What I'm Reading newsletters I send out every month, and even an online book club, then you can check out my Patreon link below. For the month of November, I am reading with our online book club the 7 Things I Wish Christians Knew About the Bible by Michael Bird, and we're going to discuss that again in the month of November. So if that sounds like something that you would like to participate in, check out the Patreon. All right, Becoming God's Family is the third book in a kind of series of sorts that Carmen Imes has written with IVP. The series started with Bearing God's Name, study of the Old Testament and the Law, and then the second entry was Being God's Image, about the doctrine of the Imago Dei, and then this third entry is Becoming God's Family, which is really a kind of a doctrine of the church explored through the story of Scripture. So what Carmen Imes is doing in all of these books is, I would categorize it as kind of popular level, approachable, accessible biblical theology, narrative theology, meaning, if you're not familiar with those terms, what that means is looking at the Scriptures holistically, kind of the entire canon, the entire canonical witness, and looking at a theme and seeing how the story, not just like nitty-gritty exegesis necessarily, or not just systematic theology, but actually how the story of Scripture unpacks a theme and kind of gives a theological reflection through narrative, through the shape of the entirety of the Scriptures. And so that's what she did in her first 2 books on different ideas. This time she's tracing, I would say, kind of an ecclesiology of sorts. Like, what is this whole idea of God forming a people, a community, or a family? What does that look like throughout the entirety of Scripture, not just the New Testament? And so that's essentially what she does, is she kind of steps through, not in an exhaustive sense or super detailed sense, because this is not a very long book, but she does step through the kind of macro narrative of Scripture and traces this idea of how do we see God building a family or building a community that is formed around worship and devotion to learning about God and reflecting on God, and what does that look like when it gets messy and controversial and dramatic, and what does that look like when it's healthy and healing, and then ultimately what does that mean for us today. So in each chapter, kind of as a sub-theme under that broader theme of God building a family, and then each sub-theme she does intentionally connect to current day issues, current things happening in our culture right now. What does this mean in practical terms for the practice of being a church or a community around worship of God today? And so she's doing a zoomed out biblical theology, unpacking different sub-themes under that idea of building a community, and then connecting it in practical ways to what this looks like for our lives today. All in just about 200 pages, so it's really not a heavy lift or a big overwrought book or anything like that. So that's the main idea. The research in this project this is one of those interesting books that is very approachable, and I'll comment more on that in the readability, and it's almost asymmetric in terms of the amount of research behind the approachability of it. So there's a really, really good research behind this, and I'll just comment on a few specific aspects of the research that stuck with me. One is it's very wide and diverse. So she pulls on what would be considered kind of almost standard commentaries from people like Peter Leithart, for example, or Christopher Wright. Standard, at least in my context of North American evangelicalism. But she also pulls on African commentaries from African writers. She pulls on womanist theologies. She also she pulls in video resources. So I really loved the diversity of thought that is represented here. She pulls on some Jewish commentaries as well. There's a wide and diverse source of research here, which is very apt and fitting for some of the themes in the book. She talks about the community of God being diverse and ethnically, nationally diverse. And so that's just borne out in the research in a way that I think she just has a lot of integrity as a scholar, talking about those themes in the way that she actually does the reading. So that was encouraging, and I was grateful to see that. Not surprised to see it, but grateful to see it. And then the other thing I want to talk about on the research is that this is one of those books where, because it is so approachable, each chapter includes one of, if you want to go deeper, kind of resource list. So at the end of each chapter, there's a reading list and also recommendations for Bible Project videos and resources. And even in the back, this is kind of an interesting resource. In the back, there are QR codes that you can scan to access different videos on YouTube specifically connected to the topic in a particular chapter. So, like any great kind of, in my opinion, this is one of those like gateway academic books for me, where someone who is interested in the topic can read this easy to read book, but then there's a lot of ways to go way deeper. And I really like when books that are accessible but well researched do that. So that's enough on the research, I think. Very solid. The readability, I'm not going to comment on this for too long, because I'll just say that this book is extremely readable, very enjoyable. This is all three of these books are like this. This is probably, for me, one of the even more enjoyable reads. I just thought this was very smooth. She incorporated a lot of anecdotes from her life, stories of friends of hers or things that she's kind of run into that embody and point to the deeper themes she's working with. So, and the way that she tells the biblical stories is very compelling. So, and she brings out kind of sometimes more obscure stories. There's one example I'm thinking of is there's a woman named Rizpah in the story of Israel's monarchy. That was a story that I like to consider myself quite familiar with scriptures, and I felt like I was completely unfamiliar with that particular story. So there's little more obscure things that she draws out in her telling of the biblical story that are very captivating and very compelling and just enjoyable to read. So the book as a whole unit, or as a contained unit, the arc of the book, all of that stuff, very, very easy to read. I would give this book to basically anybody in my congregation, regardless of their familiarity with her or familiarity with scholarship or anything. I just think this is a very great entry point. And you don't have to, this is also important to say, you don't have to have read her first two books to appreciate what she's doing in this one in terms of her readability. So it's really, it's great. Very easy to read. And that sets me up for my final reactions. I want to say a few things. I like this book. You can tell I like this book. I'm going to say a few things kind of about specifically what I appreciated about it, just to kind of round out this video. And I'll just kind of land on a recommendation from it. So one thing I really appreciate about this book is she is extremely sensitive to current day skepticism or disillusionment with the church and with the institutional church in particular. She demonstrates a great pastoral sensitivity to anyone who has those concerns, people who have been burned by church, people who have been traumatized or abused spiritually by pastors or leaders, people who are just kind of fed up with a lot of, whether it's politics or any ways that the institutional church has kind of gone off the rails or has hurt people. She's extremely sensitive to all of that and has her own experiences in some of those topics. And throughout this whole book, she goes to great lengths to speak to that person. So I was encouraged by that, and I would actually recommend this as a book for someone who's in that space, because this book is also seasoned with just really solid scriptural, biblical, theological reflection that she strikes that balance of commenting pastorally and bringing it back to the story of Scripture. That is her expertise and her kind of academic wheelhouse. So yeah, that sensitivity to kind of pastoral concerns about the church is something that I think sets this book apart. I mentioned the diversity of the sources already. I just will underline that. That's another thing that I appreciate about this. And then one more thing I want to mention specifically that I liked is she includes these margin notes, these kind of sidebar discussions on lots of very, very intense topics, actually. So I'm just going to pull up the sidebar topics here. She talks about the question of whether there was genocide in Canaan in the Old Testament violence. She talks about trauma and family trauma. One of the sidebars is specifically on Christian nationalism. And one of them is actually on even the notion of can we even what does it look like to even critique the historicity of the Bible just as a general question? So, I mean, these are topics that are the stuff of thousands and thousands of pages of books, and she does them in these little half a page to 2-page sidebars threaded throughout the book. And I was really impressed with the synthesis that she brings to those little sidebars and the clarity that she brings to them and the way that she speaks so confidently and sensitively and with a lot of balance to these like really controversial topics. And I was just really glad that she didn't shy away from those, but actually intentionally included them in these kind of separate little discussions. So that was something that kind of caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting it. I just wanted to highlight it in case that would be something that would catch your attention. But I'm just going to land on a recommendation here. So okay, I like this book. I really like what Carmen Imes is doing. I think that she is occupying a specific kind of niche in terms of the biblical narrative theology, which is an academic world that I love, but she's doing it and packaging it in such a way that is so welcoming and easy to read. So my recommendation is that this would be for people who maybe don't read the more academic stuff, the heady stuff, the like thousands of pages or whatever, the heavy tomes, but also especially people who might have that kind of pastoral sensitivity that voice might speak to them. For me and my purposes, I'll be really honest, because I like the more academic stuff, I'm more prone personally to going into those deeper sources. That's just what I like reading. This for me is a little bit more on the interest side than something that I would typically personally be interested in. I want to be honest about that. So if you are like me, that recommendation may or may not be qualified for you. But I can heartily endorse this in general because the research is so solid and her pastoral sensitivities are so solid and the deft ways that she addresses those controversial topics are really impressive. So this is a lot to really endorse and underline about Carmen Imes' project here. And I wanted to spend some time talking about it because I know that she's a popular YouTuber and is doing some really good work in that space as well. And so I want to accent her voice, I suppose, and point people towards her. And I do think if you're someone who, given all the ways that I've talked through this, if at the end of the day this sounds like something you would like to spend time with, then I heartily endorse buying a copy right away and enjoying your time with Becoming God's Family. And if you haven't read her earlier stuff, read those too. Those are a lot of the stuff that I've said here applies to those books as well. So I like everything that she's doing, and I'm happy to say that I recommend Becoming God's Family. Thanks as always for taking some time to watch.